Public corruption is pernicious, and I mean that in the literal sense of the word. The harm is not explicit right out on the surface like gang violence is, or financial fraud, or drug dealing. It is subtle, but it is real.
It perverts the system at a very basic level in a way that's incredibly corrupting of the entire system.
By the time I left office in Chicago, there were more corruption prosecutions taking place in Chicago than the rest of the nation combined. It was one right after another, after another, after another.
So I've often been asked the question, why does Chicago have the reputation for public corruption? And I think, to be candid, it's earned it.
Dan Reedy walked into my office and he said, "Can I talk to you about something that's highly confidential?" I said, "Sure." He told me that they were going to investigate corruption in the Cook County Judiciary, which ultimately became known as Operation Greylord.
What we had was a pretty compelling set of allegations that it occurred. We finally concluded that we would have to find a way to try and attack the problem through an undercover investigation.
We did not have any undercover operation in place at that time. We were struggling, should we or could we use real cases and fix those cases? And we thought, well, if you can't fix real cases, that means you have to fix fake cases. And how on earth are we going to create fake cases?
You can just start checking the boxes of how many canons of ethics you're violating. You have cases appearing in a false name. You are putting fake cases in front of the judiciary. You are having people testify under oath falsely.
We could lose our law licenses over this.
When I started working in the courts, I immediately heard rumors about judges who were taking money, lawyers who were paying off, deputy sheriffs in Chicago, policemen who were acting as bagmen for the judges, collecting the bribes from the defense attorneys so the judges could find defendants not guilty.
Chuck and I arranged to meet Terry Hake.
We're in a storage area where the FBI kept a lot of things that they don't like to talk about. But we brought him in through the freight elevator and met with him there, explained what we were doing, and the risks that he was undertaking and were he to help us. He readily agreed.
The people who have come forward and blown the whistle about public corruption have been extremely brave because, putting aside all other risks, they're so counter to the culture in most organizations to raise your hand and say, this is wrong.
We didn't learn in law school how to create a fake criminal case, and neither did the FBI. We had to find ways to get arrested. So we had to bring in not only an FBI agent to pose as the defendant, and an FBI agent, if we had a victim, to pose as the victim, and an FBI agent to be the lawyer who would represent the defendant. But for example, in shoplifting cases, we ended up having to bring in somebody who would actually walk over to the security guard and tap them on the shoulder and say, that guy just put something in his pocket.
Wayne Olson was rumored to be one of the most corrupt judges in the system. I went down there and we expected lawyers to be putting money into my hands, the judge to be taking me in on his schemes. But of course, it only works that way on television. And I became friendly with one attorney in particular named Jim Costello. The judge, Wayne Olson, would refer cases to Costello. And Costello would, of course, win that case then in front of the judge. And the judge would order the bond money returned to Costello as part or all of his fee. And then Costello was to kick back 50% of the bond money to the judge. Costello was paying off Olson every week in his chambers $500 to $1,000 a week for this referral scheme. Dan Reedy, the architect of Greylord, decided, well, we certainly have a pattern of criminal activity going on in chambers every week. Let's bug Judge Olson's chambers.
If a judge was thinking about being corrupt, he had to worry that we had flipped a lawyer that he had dealt with for a long time. He had to worry that we would bug his chambers and pick him up doing that. He had to worry that we would bug his phone. He had to worry that the lawyer he was dealing with was actually was an FBI agent, because we used FBI agent lawyers.
Over the 3 or 4 years that we were undercover, we created 65 various fake cases, ranging from drunk driving to shoplifting to narcotics offenses to gun offenses.
At that time, it was, probably the most active public corruption office in the country, and had been for a while.
I ended up testifying at the trials of 23 defendants in federal court in Chicago.
The first case I ever got to work on in the corruption sphere was a judicial corruption case involving the only defendant, I believe, who's ever been convicted of taking bribes in a homicide case in the United States. These were hitmen homicide cases, and he took bribes to throw them for organizational crime. The brazenness of that was shocking.
The level of corruption that's been in high public office, including the governor's office, has been stunning.
It's unfortunate that the history of our district includes more than one Illinois governor going to trial.
The track record of, for example, of how many aldermen have been convicted is stunning.
It's very apparent that public officials haven't learned the lesson of history.
An election came along in which I decided to run for office, and in the process of that election, I had to confront the fact that the deck was heavily stacked in favor of the candidates who were supported by the regular Democratic organization. In those days, there were about 40,000 people who worked for either the city or the county, and they were all employed as Democratic patronage employees.
Patronage is the process in which somebody who's new to an office is able to say the staff of that office needs to go so that he or she can replace the staff with people that are loyal to him or her. And in the worst case scenario, will agree to spend time campaigning for that individual, even sometimes on government time.
Several of my friends from law school, young lawyers like myself, really developed the theory that it wasn't fair and it wasn't constitutional to effectively allocate government resources to one candidate or one faction of a party. The election came and went. I lost by 600 votes out of about 20,000 that were cast. And a year later, the Seventh Circuit issued a decision saying, if what these guys have alleged is true, then they've got a cause of action for a violation of the Civil Rights Act and for violation of the First Amendment. At that point, we had a decree entered by the district court that said, with regard to all of those jobs in all of the counties that make up the Northern District of Illinois, no political firing. The problem with patronage reform that has made this case still alive 49 years after it was filed is that the patronage germ runs deep in the DNA of Illinois politics and Chicago politics. We expected government officials to obey court orders, and they didn't.
Part of it is their own hubris, their view that the office belongs to them rather than it belonging to the public, and that there's a trust involved in it. That's a key issue. But secondly is the attitude that they can get away with it.
It was really the lifeblood of the political organization, both on the Democratic side in the city and the Republican side in the state, because it gave the politicians such power.
Part of it has been that people have come to accept it as that's the way it is, instead of accepting it as that's the way it shouldn't be.
The availability of a federal forum with independent federal judges was and is critical to the ability to get a remedy for unlawful political hiring and firing and the rest of the corruption that goes with that process.
And as long as human beings are greedy and they don't have a good moral compass, they will deviate from the proper legal standards and think they can get away with it.
It's not that you're not going to be tempted. Just know where the area of temptation is. Is it money? Is it just something else? And then avoid that, or be on the lookout for it. And don't rationalize your own behavior to meet your ends.